Well, it's done now. So, so we asked you for your last assignment. Again, these homework assignments are not just to give you guys busy work. We know that many of you have full-time commitments. Some of you, this is going to be your side hustle that will turn into a full-time commitment. Some of you are just interested in what the process is. So we want these homework assignments to be something that will allow you to present a strong proposal. So maybe after this course, these courses, you can go to your board or to somebody else and say, this is what we're looking to do. One of the best things you can come out with is your SWOT analysis. So SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And as a reminder, the strengths and weaknesses are things that can be worked on internally. So that's within your organization. If you're a sole proprietor, it's you. If you, when you look at the other portion of the analysis, opportunities and threats, those are things that can be. Those are things that are external. So those are the things that are outside of your organization and also outside of your control. But you want to prepare for all of them. So, does anybody have a SWOT analysis that they completed that they would like to share before we start today's session?
We could. Easter has a question about last session, which we'll get to in just a second. If that's okay, Easter, we'll go through this first. But I did get a question from one of the participants that I wanted to share with everyone. This exercise, this SWOT analysis exercise, is really important for your project, but it may also be useful for you to conduct on your organization. So you could do one or both of those things, and that will probably help you. Both of those processes will help you with financing or talking to funders. So if you did your SWOT analysis on your organization but would like to do it on a project, feel free to submit a second one or vice versa. So the strengths, does anyone want to throw out an organizational strength they came up with or a strength for their specific project in the chat or out loud? Or an example of a strength?
Hey, this is Erin from Rochester. A strength that I had listed for a project we're thinking through is that it's geographically supported. So we have team members that are in the vicinity that can offer support, whether it's a community leader or other residents or regional leaders or whatever it may be, that it's not so remote that we can't be supportive of its success.
That's a great strength in your geography. Any other thoughts on what a strength for a project might be?
Hi, this is Doris. So I believe that when there's a well-documented need for a particular type of low-income housing, such as senior housing, has been mentioned many times before, and recognizing for sure that we do have an aging population in place for the most part. We know most of our seniors actually do retire here in Western New York and in place, and we know that those of us who are part of this great, generation of baby boomers, that represents kind of, millions of people in our society and in our local area, many thousands that will soon be, of age to be in senior housing, downsized and all. So I thought that was definitely a particular strength in a potential proposal for funding. And also, who you have, of course, supporting the project, right? Who in the community, who are the major stakeholders, who's the principal. And in this instance, it's, you know, a church that's very well known in the community associated with a pastor that is very interested in, you know, beginning to transform into these areas of development as part of, you know, community service and social innovation, and doing that as part of, you know, an arm of, you know, the ministry. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks, Doris.
Doris. That was really good. If you notice under weaknesses, we have which weaknesses or things that do not support the strategy. Having her talking about how the church or the ministry has a documented need, um, and having that church have a strong connection to meeting that need, and having a pastor that is known within that community for doing good things. This is going to make your project that much more palpable. So when you are going through those public approvals process, those things, you're going to have a little bit smooth sailing. So you won't be coming up because you won't be coming up against so much opposition. Um, and also think of if any of you are on the call and do not have a documented need for how you hope your housing project can address it, that's something you want to think of as a weakness. And then that doesn't mean that once you identify something as a weakness, then your project is done. No, you need to figure out a way that how can we address that? So how can we turn that weakness into an opportunity? Because maybe, and we'll talk about this further on, maybe that will be a reason your weaknesses or your threats may be something that you can turn into a joint venture. So with that said, does anyone want to share any weaknesses? Or opportunities or threats?
Hi, this is Doris again. So I perceived one of the weaknesses to be, you know, if we decided, as you said, you know, to turn, you know, a weakness into a joint partnership, and let's say we'd like to be able to include, you know, additional services for specialized populations. Specifically, you know, the vision is to have um, a day center for autistic children in the area, in the city, to serve that need for that special population of child. And you know, it's just so laden with like regulation and compliance and, you know,
Right, right.
everything from, you know, the whole abilities and design. And so that kind of makes me already think about, you know, hard days and nights, just in terms of compliance, even around, you know, the senior citizen aspect and the agent aspect, and knowing that everything also has to be, you know, specifically around, you know, their special needs in terms of access, transportation, you know, flow, you know, all kinds of concerns, right? Like, no carpets. Sorry, I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Doris, for sharing that. And I know it's very hard to also think about. Sometimes it's easy to think about all the things that you don't have, and it's hard to come up with the strengths. So it was good that some of you responded right away with your strengths, which is a great way to think. And also the weaknesses, you know, they're just weak for now. I think Alma made a comment. I think Alma made a comment in the chat, I think. I don't know. Did I see
Yep.
that right, or am I making up stuff?
Yep. Alma mentioned that she felt that a lack of access to capital is both a threat and a weakness. Rising interest rates are a definite threat, right? So again, internal and external, you know, that is, couldn't have said it better myself. I would agree with that qualification, Alma.
And everybody on this in this series, are going to face the same thing because we are all in New York. And we are still, the pandemic hit New York the hardest. And so a lot of the typical funders that we would be able to go to around this time of year, they completely restructured the way that they were going to do their giving. A lot of the local philanthropic support that usually was readily available, they completely changed around and said, okay, we're doing everything was related to COVID relief. And then they forgot, like, oh, well, with COVID relief, everybody's staying home. Oh, everybody's not in quality housing. Oh, uh-oh. We got a problem. So that that redirection in funding is going to make it really hard for us. But that just means, going through this series, having our one-on-one session is going to be really important because you're going to have to figure out, how can I make my application more competitive? What do I need to, how do I address this need? What makes me stick out other than other people? Because they've earmarked so much funding towards COVID relief, and I'm asking to do something completely different. And so why should Homes and Community Renewal fund me and fund my project? So we can definitely talk about that much later on in today's session, especially. I saw Doris also made a comment about the same thing about the lack of capital. Yeah. So that means, are you all really concerned about not seeing available resources, or that you think that the resources have dried up for affordable housing? If anyone feels comfortable sharing a little bit more or expanding.
I would also say not just dried up, but scarce.
Mm. Mm. Mm-hmm.
Teresa's sharing that in Rochester, they're at a landlock,
Uh-oh.
a couple empty lots. Oh, but parking is an issue, and it's a weakness, but an opportunity for redesigning. That's an interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Parking is interesting. I always tell people looking at development, so I don't know what they're going to do in Rochester with zoning. We've kind of mentioned that that's changing in
Yeah, because they're getting
Rochester.
ready to change. They're getting ready to update it, right? Yeah.
In Buffalo, when they redid their zoning, the Green Code eliminated parking, right?
Yep.
Which
The need for parking, right?
that's fine, but that is, as we talked today about market analysis, your market analysis might tell you that you can't build this project without providing parking because that's what people need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm smiling because I had a conversation with Yolanda about building infrastructure, that you build infrastructure for reality, not for the way you want people to function, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think parking is a challenge for anyone doing doing projects in a city, regardless of what the zoning says.
Yeah, and I thought personally, and I know we need to move on, but I thought personally, before the green code, it was every 1.5 units needs a parking spot. The thing is that when you're targeting 30 to 50% area median income, and this is, 10 years ago, the likelihood that someone that is making, $18,000 a year with two kids, 2 or 3 kids, is going to go out and say, well, let me just splurge and use my excess income and splurge and buy a car. Absolutely not. So
Or
we had all
1.5
this
cars.
parking. Yeah, we had all this parking, and you can do donut holes in the parking. We would have much rather used that for an apartment. We would have been able to do more units, but they made us put the parking there. And that was also because of the community outreach. The neighbors were so up in arms. They were just like, we shouldn't have to fight for parking and all this other kind of stuff. And we put the parking, and nobody used it for years. For years. So yeah, we have the new green code now. So hopefully we don't have to worry about that. So Maggie, you want to move on to the next?
Yep. So I would just say if anyone has any questions about this, just reach out. And then I just wanted to recap because Easter put a
Yes,
question
she
about
did.
last session in the chat. Easter, is it okay if we wait till the end and then I can pull it back up as a visual and we can talk about it a little more?
Sure, that is fine.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
So we're in session 4. We've made it through. We only just have a few more to go. We're going to talk about how to examine the feasibility of your project. So is it a go or a no-go? And then lay a foundation for understanding next steps for your team. So again, you all have been knighted as developers. Let's see if we're ready. Oh, I love this slide. We just were talking about. Look at that, guys. Maggie completely showed off for you all.
Talking about
That's
vintage
it.
slide transitions.
No, I remember when I learned how to do this, I'm really dating myself in college. I went crazy with the one that would twirl in and come raining down. I love PowerPoint. Anyway, our kids probably would be like, what is PowerPoint, Mom? Um, So let's go through the phases of real estate development process. Again, in this session, I know you all, this isn't, we're not in person, so you're not able to kind of chat with each other in between sessions or after sessions or on breaks. But we have some folks that have some experience in development. Some folks are venturing into it. Some already have a project and just want to be able to see how the project can go through. So we have you all at various different levels of development on this call. So again, we always, this is not a lecture. You're welcome to jump in at any time if you have questions. So first, before I start going into this, I want you all to pay a very close attention to the timeline. If anybody is having shock about a year to 2 to 3 years to still be in the pre-development phase, I don't know if this thing has emojis, but put up like a thumbs down or a frowning face or a cry or tears. I really, really, really am glad that Maggie put this together this way. I see all the thumbs down coming through. Oh, Jolanda had the crying face. You do need to pay attention to this, all seriousness. You need to pay attention to this. For those of you who are representing the faith-based community, please screenshot, download, tell this to your leadership with your church. They do not understand this. They do not understand that a project is not just because you speak it, it's not going to be, you have to go through this litmus test. You have to ask yourself all these tough questions, all the stuff that we ask you to go through for your homework and stuff. This is not, again, not to give you busy work, but this is how long it takes. For those of you who are already in the affordable housing development business, like our folks from Habitat, and you already have a model and a rubric for how you do your development, it still takes this long because in this whole process, remember, and we're going to go through this in I think a slide or two, it's going to go through the steps of the pre-development phase. Remember, you're waiting for those other people to give you your report so that you can submit it for a funding application to be competitive enough for you to be invited to apply. Invited to apply. If this is the first time you're hearing that, you can then put up more of your frowny face and your thumbs down because that's how most of it works. And that's what I want to say for those of you who are doing low-income housing tax credit deals and you're using those kind of funding structures to move your project forward. You're pretty much doing a really long, expensive letter of intent because the first time you apply, you're not gonna get it. I don't know if you guys remember that In Vogue song, "Never Gonna Get It, Never Gonna Get It." You're just not gonna get it. You're not gonna get it. They like to know that you're interested. They like to see what your project is. But the only time you get funded is when you're submitting it for the second time. So that's why when you see this arrow here, year 2 to 3, and when you get into the deal making and you finalize the financing, that's usually when they say, okay, this person is serious. Because at this point, depending on what city you're in, every 6 months you have to renew all your public approvals. You have to update all your reports. So your survey, even though you know that land did not change, we did not have an earthquake, nothing happened to that plot of land, you still have to update that survey to make sure it's exactly the lot that you said that you were going to build on. You still have to update all your environmentals. So you got to hope that while you weren't under construction, no one has been dumping stuff there contaminating your site. For some of you, you may lose site control. You might have a designated developer agreement that ends within 6 months or a year. They don't see that you got the project funded, you lose that status. So now you have to go out and actually get a purchase offer contract. That's expensive. The whole time when you're in this phase of the residential development process, this is all on your dime. All on your dime. So from year 1 to actually when you start putting the first framing up or the first nail in the building, this is all out of pocket costs. Now, there are some places that can give you pre-development expenses back, but most likely it will not be until your project is fully funded. You have to be prepared to have at a minimum $50,000 on up while you're waiting for your project to start construction, meaning that you have signed all your, you've done your closing, a soft closing. If you get funding from the state, they do a soft closing. They don't act as bank, but that means they give you the award to say you are now allowed to start your project again on your own dime. So that means you have to close with a bank for your capital financing so that you can pay for construction while it's going through construction. And then as you go through all of that process, you may do another closing. Remember, that's legal fees, depending upon how big your project is. Legal fees can start at $20,000 on up for a closing. And then when you get into operations, and a lot of people say, well, now that's not my problem because we have a 20-year, 50-year affordability period. I'm not going to be around in 50 years. That's understandable, but you still are required to keep that building in compliance during this time. So once you get out of pre-development, which should take you from 18 to 24 months to secure financing, then you start the construction. Hopefully it's a pretty decent construction season. And it's not like the one we're in right now where everything is going through the roof. And your contractors have the financial wherewithal to see the project all the way through and can wait on payments. Then you go on from there.
The eternal optimist in me is saying that if you are here in year 1, you do have a little time to let the construction market calm down post-pandemic before you get to year 4. So there's your silver lining. 1 second, I just gotta let some people in the room.
Okay. Anybody had any questions about what I've said before we go on to the next slide? Okay, I know I saw some faces, some people were in shock, so hopefully the shock wears down as we move on. All right, next slide, Maggie. Okay, so site control. As I said, in Buffalo, we do something called the city of, if the site is owned by the city of Buffalo, you can get something from the Department of Real Estate called a designated developer agreement, a DDA. If you have this agreement that simply says, we, the city of Buffalo, will give you ABC Community Development Corp control of these parcels of land for the purposes of affordable housing development. It will give it to you for a certain term based on the fact that you know that you need that site control in order for you to get funding. So it's there's no cash exchanged here. It's just a letter saying that you have temporary site control of this city-owned land while you're seeking finances. Now, remember from the last slide, we looked at 1 or 2 years. So you have, they're going to give you 1 year. So you need to get serious. But knowing that if you're going after a much larger project, fix anything in the millions, that that's going to most likely be a low-income housing tax credit deal, housing trust fund and stuff like that. It does take you a while to get to secure those funding. One, because they don't come around all the time. Sometimes they used to be only once a year. I think now they're doing twice a year. But either way, you still need to show site control. So here's the questions you need to be able to answer. Do we think we can achieve our goals to serve our target population on this site? So just because City of Rochester, City of Buffalo is saying we're considering this our home ownership zone or our opportunity zone or whatever they want to call it, and you're like, oh, let's get in on this opportunity zone. They're giving the land, $1 a square foot, whatever. We can do this. We can afford it. You got to ask yourself, will we be able to meet the needs that we've been able to identify at this site? If the answer is no, that doesn't mean this project is over. It means that this project, you might need to put back on your thinking caps. You want to ask yourself, what are the risks? That's when going back to knowing the history of that community, knowing that neighborhood is vital, because just because it's vacant doesn't mean that it was not a funeral space. It wasn't an old gas station. We ran into things that they were like, oh, there was an old printing press here. What? Since when? Also, when you're getting things from a municipality, their title is clean, but when it gets to your hands, it may not be so clean. So you got to know about what are the risks. And then depending upon how far you go back for your title search, that's the more money you spend. Do we think we can mitigate them? So can we deal with these issues, right? So for example here, are there any neighborhood political or entitlements for this particular area of your proposed site? What are we looking at financially? So you may want to be able to say, well, let's just say we can get the site for free, or we can get the site through eminent domain, or we can get it deeded to us. Like I told you before, I've been able to get properties deeded to us through the U.S. Department of Justice because there were homes or properties that were full of vagrant activity. So the Department of Justice says, we will give it to you if you can just have a better use of these vacant properties. So, okay, but then, what is it? No good deed goes unpunished, right? So you get these properties and then you get in them and it costs you more to secure them than you have in your budget. So you really need to think about, be able to answer these questions. Remember this whole session today is about feasible. Is the site feasible to meet our need? What about the end user? Remember, our sessions play upon the other the session before. One of the things we asked before we entered the class, how are we affecting the end user? So we're going to put 42 units here in this neighborhood. How is the transportation system? Do they have access to food? Do they have schools here? These are going to be for young families. How are people going to live, work, and play in this site? Is this a disservice? Are we putting people in the middle of nowhere? You want to be able to answer those questions. Next slide, please. So, and still in our initial feasibility here, some of the things that you want to start going through, again, we have is this a go or no go? So you constantly want to be putting your project through this litmus test. Now, here's the things you need to keep in mind. This does not mean you're having this all internally, right? Right here, under the third bullet, we saying assess zoning, entitlement issues, gauge community support. you are still doing community engagement and outreach during this feasibility process. Because the one thing you don't want to do is secure site control, get it all designed for what you want, and then go out for your community meeting and say, this is what we're proposing. And they're going to say, well, wait a second. No one told us about that. Well, what's going on? I wanted to use this lot for a community garden. And now you have this problem. So, and when looking at entitlement issues, you want to look at things that are deeded for certain things. Are you walking into a brownfield? I don't have lots of experience with that one, but these are, significantly contaminated sites. When you're looking at those things, you want to go through these tasks right away. If you want to do it in an Excel spreadsheet, but these are great things to do when you're doing community meetings. So what do we want to do? What's the target population? Who's our end user? What are potential funding? Right now, there's a lot of funding around looking at social determinants of health and how the built environment can make a positive impact on that. Okay, so are we looking at Robert Wood Johnson? Are we looking to go to hospitals to look for funding, or funding that's usually geared towards the medical community? Is this an environmental issue? Okay, so are we going to be also partnering with groups that can get funding from the EPA? What funding sources are out there? Are we doing dormitory authority? What are we doing here? Some of your outcomes that you're hoping to get, back to my thing that I said before, is this a go or no go? You need to be able to make those cut and dry decisions. Okay, guys, we can get the, we spoke with the city of Rochester. They've created this opportunity zone in this neighborhood. We want to take advantage of it. Okay. But if we take advantage of it, we're putting people in an area where there are food deserts, poor schools, or no schools, or blah, blah, blah. You need to be able to say, is this a go or no go? If it's a no-go, then you need to stop, go back to the drawing board. Again, do not be afraid to have these conversations with the community. That keeps them involved and that keeps them engaged. Because you can say, okay, we tried that. The community said, well, we don't want to see, we think 50 units is too much. What about 35? You want to go back to the drawing board? They're saying it's 35. When you start looking at the financials, it may not work for 35 units. So you need to go back. You still need to still keep the community engaged around the support of that. You want to look at pre-development funds. They're saying they're for the next steps, but your time should be covered as you're going through this, because this is determining how successful this project is going to be. So if it does take that year to actually get through the feasibility, then at least you've done your due diligence. You don't have to keep going back to the community unless you're making changes to your plans. At this point, if you've vetted the community for a year, you've come up with this project, it says like it's a way to go, it's a thumbs up, then you're ready to go. The rest of it is mostly financial feasibility and making sure you got the right development team. Anything you want to add, Maggie, before we go to the next slide?
Just listening to you, I just realized all the graphics that we've sourced for the real estate development process show it as a linear process. But I think, as you can tell based on what Stephanie was just sharing, it's very circular. So, each step is going to cause you sometimes some heartburn, but sometimes it'll open up opportunities. So
Absolutely. Okay. Now, we want to be able to answer these questions. Does this project make sense? I know you might want to say, why didn't we ask that the first time? You got to get there. You got to get there. Does this project make sense? Now, I don't know if all of you who are on the session today were in the session last week, which was my jam, because I love community engagement. But one of the things is, if the community is against it, you're not getting any support. It's going to be hard to get the funding. Does this make sense? Or does the built environment make sense to meet this community needs? Maybe the community is suffering from long-term substance abuse. And, that is what's tearing the community apart and causing the urban decay. Then you need to have social service providers, human service providers, people who can do substance counseling and that kind of thing. You need to go have them come in full service that community, meet that need, and then see outside of that need, are did the substance abuse, did those kind of things cause people to have housing insecurities? So your project may be off 3 years because you have to do some of this soft planning, before, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Does the project make sense? If the root of the cause is housing insecurity, then doing a housing project makes sense. If the root cause is something related to not having a housing insecurity, then we need to go back to the drawing board. Now, I do know that I used to work at a community center, and housing brings in the money. I understand if you all are representing organizations, human service agencies, or people are saying, listen, we got a little bit of money in our endowment, or I want to make this money that we have make more money. I want to use this opportunity. Real estate is a great way to go. And I'm not telling you not to go that way, but going the route of affordable housing is a beast on its own. If you're not willing to stay the course with that, you need to continue to ask yourself, is it making sense? As a result of, and then another question here, as a result of additional investigation, what additional risk have we identified? So just like I said, we had vacant lots, we have vacant properties that were donated to us for CHOTO activity, which is community housing development, that's single family homes from the Department of Justice. Once we did more further investigation, then we saw that one of the houses had some illegal dog fighting. We found, human bone. I mean, you name it, we found all these things. And it's like, oh, we need to clean this up before we can do that. This is full of lead, the lead abatement, and the lead, asbestos. Before we knew it, we're like, oh, this is why we got it for free, because it's going to take $300,000 to get this property livable. But the market in that neighborhood is 52. This is a high return for the community. It's going to put the organization in the hole. Do we really want to continue on? So the other thing we have here is you want to determine whether major thresholds can be achieved. Addressing challenging property conditions, like I just told you. Dealing with properties that have high environmental hazards, lead, and asbestos, especially in Rust Belt cities or where we are, that is a huge problem. Again, going back into those neighborhood political entitlement issues, how are you going to be able to get through that? And is this viable long term, right? So the one thing that people forget about, the affordability period for housing trust fund, the minimum is 25 years. So you have to keep those properties affordable. Understand, the first 5 years, you can't raise the rent. So if a pandemic happened and people lose their jobs and they're not able to pay their rent, there's nothing you can do about that. You are in that position until you had the property for 5 years, if you're using New York State Housing Trust Funds. Sometimes the city of Buffalo and maybe Rochester, if you're using something called home funds, it doesn't stand for anything, but it's related to housing projects. They have that requirement too. Usually the first 3 to 5 years, you cannot increase the rents. Well, what if the water's gone up? What if the tax assessment's gone up? Is this project viable long term? Do we have a backup plan? Do we have an operating reserve? These are things you need to think about, not just, oh, we're done, we got it fully rented, but is the rent's going to be able to take care of the project? So you want to think about those things in the final feasibility. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit of time on this slide. So we're going to walk you through each task. Again, we're still in pre-development. We are not in construction. Don't give up, folks. So here's the good thing. Bullet 1, 2, 3, 4, probably 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 can all be outsourced, give or take.
Really, all of them can be.
Yeah, they really, all of them can. So you don't have to say, oh my God, I have to do all this work. No, all you have to do is just have a strong project manager to coordinate getting all these reports done. So when you're trying to make the decision, that litmus test, is this a go or no go? You want to be able to say, well, it's a go when we look at the market study. Check, it works. That there is a need for affordable housing, or there is a need for homeownership. Now, we don't go through this in our series, but there's if any of you have received a market study and would be interested in having Maggie or I to help you understand what it means, a lot of times they're written in a way that makes things look bad, but that's because you're writing your proposal to address it. So it's almost like sometimes reading a finance report. It's good when you see like where the negative is, to say, oh, okay, well, this is negative because they've taken on more programming. So this had to be decreased so that can be increased. So if you're noticing that there is not a lot of home properties being sold, then that might make you think, well, maybe this is a more stable neighborhood and people aren't putting properties up for sale. And so you want to look at what can the market bear for this community. Can it bear homeownership? Is multifamily housing much better? What's going on? When you start looking at the appraisals, again, they're not going to be, they're not influenced by anything but what the neighborhood can produce. So what is there? Does it look like a decent neighborhood or not? And if your appraisal comes back saying, especially if you're doing homeownership projects, you do that appraisal and it says properties only go for 50,000, and you know that it's sat vacant for 20, 30 years, you already know you're going to need a significant deep subsidy for that project to happen. For many people, this is where they stop. The numbers, unfortunately, they don't lie. So this is a go, no go. If you're like, I don't care what the numbers say, I'm going to do this anyway. Fantastic. Well, you figure out, you get your environmental report, and you got some challenges there. Based upon what you find in your environmental report, sometimes just to get the virgin soil, you're looking at $100,000 right off the top. That's something that you can't see. Something you can't see, but it can't be done without addressing those environmental issues. Now, because you're in the feasibility portion of this, these are just the reports you need to tell your potential funder that this is what's going on at the site that I'm proposing the development. In your proposal, you're going to put how you plan to address the findings from these reports. You have to put that in the narrative. So if the market is saying rents can go for 3 bedrooms can go for $1,000, and your project says that we're going to be doing 3 bedrooms for 1,500, you gotta be able to back that up, because they're going to look at those reports more than what you're saying. Because they're going to say this person is a third party, they have no skin in the game, and you're just going to tell me something because you want to get this project. But the numbers say the most you can get is $1,000 a month for a 3 bedroom. You have to make sure your things line up. This is also a good point when you do the appraisals and the environmental reports, that you just update your, I mentioned to you all before about a landing page for your proposed project. So you've already met with the community, you're updating them on what we find. That may drastically change the design of the project. So that's when you call a meeting with the community saying, hey, we got our environmental reports back, and this is now showing to be, it was an old gas station. And there's a tank that's leaking underneath, and that's going to need to be cleaned up. It's called something for your environmental justice. So you're going to want to make sure that you do that. That is not on the environmental consultant. That's going to be on you as a developer to disclose that. You want to do that. That's the right thing to do, to disclose that to the community, and then say, Because of that, that added another $1 million cost to the project. Therefore, we're scaling it back this way to keep it within budget. So those are the opportunities you want to say. You want to make sure that you're being transparent with the community. Go ahead, Maggie.
Oh, before you start talking about design, because I think those first three, are kind of tied tied together. I think that's a great point, Stephanie, of the landing, reminding people about the landing page.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to mention two things. So the first, those three items, market study, appraisal, and environmental studies, when you go talk to a lender, eventually, when you talk to a traditional lender to bridge your tax credits or do the construction, or whenever you're going to involve a traditional lender and however you're going to involve them, they will ask for those three things.
Yeah, these are
and
not optional.
And when Stephanie mentioned earlier, you want to, sometimes you do have to get these done, and then you're going to have to plan to get them updated just because of the timeline of the development process.
Your
And
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask you to expound on environmental studies anyway. So
yeah, so your environmental studies, usually you need to do something called a phase 1 report, depending on how depending on what your phase 1 report is. Sometimes they won't allow you to submit the application for funding until you've done a phase 2. Sometimes they can say you do the phase 2 before you start the construction, and they will allow for that to be paid through the project, which is super. So the phase 1 is saying what's there. They dig in the soil, they test the soil. If it's an existing structure, they look in the history of the structure. They want to know what was going on, what has been there in the past. So they check it and they test everything. If it's an existing structure, you want to test radon, asbestos, and lead. Those are the top things you definitely want to test those things. Even if it's still an existing structure, they want to take soil samples. When you apply for the environmental study, they're going to ask you, are there any tanks nearby? So do you have a 7-Eleven nearby where you can get the tanks for your grill? Those things matter, because if it was a fire or there was an explosion, they want to know how far that is from your site. Also, in some environmental studies, you have to do a noise study. Depending on the consulting that you use, I always tell people, ask for the whole thing. They want to know when the trains go, when the planes go. If you're in an urban area, they want to know, because they want to make sure that there's no noise impact on the end user, and is your construction project going to cause noise impact for the people who are already there. So this is covering both sides. That's why those reports are a little bit more expensive. And please, please, please do not have your application due August 1st, and then you call your environmental consultant July 15th. You are not going to get the project in time. You need to give them 30 to 45 days for a phase 1 report. 45 days. That is the most time sensitive thing. Market studies and appraisals, you want to get those done right away. But the environmental studies take the longest, and the more detailed they are, the better for you for your funding. Whatever comes out in those environmental reports to phase 1, you need to make sure your design team, your architects, you're going to say, well, what do they care about the soil? Because their construction is going to be able to mitigate, as we mentioned in all the other sides. How am I mitigating these things? How am I able to answer these questions? By showing it in design. Okay? So you want to do that. Your environmental studies will also include something called a NEPA. I think it's like National Environmental Protection Agency, something. And so it's N like Nancy, E like elephant, P like Paul, A like apple. In that, you, the developer, are required to do an environmental justice narrative, which means, have I notified the community of the findings from this environmental phase 1 report? If your answer is no, you will not get your HUD notice of funding award, meaning it doesn't matter how great your project is, HUD's not going to release that money to you without you showing that you've done your due diligence for environmental report.
I just wanted to add to that, Stephanie, because I've talked to a couple of our class participants about their specific projects and also
Yep.
inspired by some of our other work together. So when you're hiring your consultant to do your environmental analysis, your phase one, your phase one, it really doesn't matter that much. But if it comes back and says you need a phase two and you think it's probably dirty, like Stephanie said, oh, there's a tank in the ground and it's not out,
Mm-hmm.
or oh, there was a dry cleaner here, some kind of like obvious
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
indicators. You're going to want to ask questions to your consultant about their experience with brownfields.
Mm-hmm.
And I would recommend talking to your, development advocate, whoever's advising you, your attorney, your architect maybe, to make sure that you're hiring the right person to complete that phase two, especially if you are going to look at the brownfield as a source in your
A
capital
financial
stack.
resource.
So
Mm-hmm.
again, it's very circular, but that's some good advice, that you want to have when you're hiring someone to do a phase two. And then the second thing I would add is that each of these studies, it depends kind of like how much it might cost. And some of
Mm-hmm.
that depends on your project. Some of it depends on the market. But just in general, even if you have a development advisor, if you ask me for a recommendation, I might give you a couple names, but you want to try and get a couple quotes too, because you just want to show that, you're doing the best you can with your funds and getting the best deal and being competitive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would also add, in this process, you also want to be thinking about what will allow your project to be the most competitive. So I strongly encourage you, look to see if any of these consultants are minority or business women-owned enterprises. This is where you can get your points. And not to say that you just want to do it for the points, but that does give you a way to keep that money in that community. And I would definitely you definitely want to see if there are when you're getting your bids, most funding sources require that a certain percentage of your contract goes towards MWBE, even though we're not talking about all of that today. But there are moments here where folks can this can be good money for folks to be able to be part of these projects. Also, these folks often lived in a neighborhood. They may live in a neighborhood. So again, that's another way to bring that back. I'm not going to go a lot into entitlements, but when we talk about here refining the performa and the development and operating budgets, you want to have that budget open under every process. The market study, what's the estimate? You want to put that in your soft costs. Appraisal, soft costs. Environmental phase one, soft costs. Design, soft costs. So they're going to say value engineering, your site plans, stuff that you're going to need to go for zoning, to pull permits. I remember all this is going on because you're under the process of submitting this application for funding. So this is just, even though it's called pre-development, it's just pre-development because you haven't started physical construction, but you're still in the process of submitting applications for funding. So these things have to be up to date. Now, from what I understand, environmental studies can be kept fresh for a year, or the seeker. I've done the seeker short form and the seeker long form. They all should just be called long form because they give me a long headache. Um, after you get a few under your belt, it becomes pretty normal. You know the process. You got to have a good architect. Have a good architect. Your development team is important. If you got anybody that's shaky or just starting out, you don't want that on your first project. You want people who are tried and true. They've gone through this process. They know what they're doing. Because they'll even tell you, oh, you know what? You didn't put this in your scope or your RFP, but you need to also have me do a sound study for you. And you're like, oh, I totally forgot about that. And then that goes back to the architect. Why? Because he can make sure they can have windows that are sound, that can reduce some of the noise if you're building on a very busy street. Your financing plans can dictate a lot of this, but as Maggie said, there is no way of getting out of the first four at all. So you need to make sure that you have those things in place. Your pro forma is, I mean, if you can get it and fold it in your wallet and walk around with it, you need to know that budget. You need to know that well. Um, there is no, yeah. If you're a person that's like, well, I'm not really good with finances, get a strong person that is, and they know these budgets well. A strong grant writer, a strong feasibility person, you need to have that in place. Again, the goal is this a go or no go? At this point, after you've received all these reports and if you have any questions or if you are concerned, I'm not too sure, this is go time. Are we moving forward? At this point, you spent $10,000 in reports. So is this a go or no go?
Or more.
Yeah. So let's go to the next slide because I know we had a bunch to cover before we wrap up.
Yeah, I did just want to add, sorry, Stephanie, but
Yeah.
I think if anyone has questions, so something that Lisk has been working on, and it's really not done yet, but we're working on building a list of consultants that have been vetted, and indicating whether they're MWBE or women-owned or what neighborhoods they specialize in, what cities. But aside from that, some resources we could connect you with, Stephanie or myself, we probably have some blank RFPs if you're looking to source some of these partners, and even we're going to talk today a little bit more. Stephanie's going to talk to you a little bit more about a joint venture. But something I just want to emphasize on this slide before we move on is whether or not you end up doing a joint venture, you're really going to want to have that one entity that is your development champion. And it might be you once you've taken this class, or it might be your attorney, or it might be your architect, but you want to see who has that experience. And sometimes when you're looking at larger scale affordable housing projects, you might want that champion to be your pro forma analyst or your financial consultant. So if you ever have any questions about that or need resources for hiring any of this out, please feel free to reach out and we can connect you with what we have.
Absolutely. So, oh, thank you. So at this point now, and you've done your reports and you're looking at things, and if it's a go, then it's a go. If it's a no-go, that doesn't mean the project is a no-go because it doesn't work. It may not work with just you or your organization by itself. So we want to talk about joint ventures in our last few minutes that we have together. Here are some reasons for joint ventures. One is the experience. I suggest if this is your first time out and you've never done this before, it does not hurt to do a joint venture because you can learn from somebody else's mistakes so that your project, when you do it solely by yourself, you can say, oh, I've learned this. This was a hiccup there. This could have been tightened up. Okay, now we're ready for the next project. Sometimes it's specialized skills. Sometimes you can do joint ventures for various portions of the project. Like some churches, sometimes they consult with my group for the project management. So they may have the site control, they may have gone through the feasibility, it makes sense, but they do not have the capacity to actually see the project all the way through. So that's when they can get with someone to do that. And to act on their behalf. Sometimes it's the resources. Sometimes it's the social capital, which is not listed here, but that can be a resource. I know some people have identified, I think Doris identified the social capital as a strength for her project with the church. Um, and that can also be a reason for someone to say, okay, I'm a multi-million dollar developer. I'm looking to build where Dar's church is. I'm going to partner with them because I can see that this person is well respected in the community. So there's different ways that you can look at that. Again, the relationships, you can also put that under social capital. Um, you know these people, you want to build a relationship. Sometimes you are a housing agency, and your partner is the school systems. I know a lot of folks know about those uh, school housing partnerships, or building the community around public schools. Sometimes you are a medical partner, and you want to strengthen your folks' health outcomes by making sure that they don't have housing insecurities. So again, you're strengthening these relationships by doing this joint venture. Um, Sometimes it just makes sense financially, and I consider everybody a partner because no one does a project solely by themselves. Nobody. So you always want to consider everything as a joint venture. A joint venture also will be a legally binding thing. You'll have a contract with that. This is not a gentleman handshake. This is not saying, hey, you do something well, I do something well, let's get into this. No, you definitely want to have your lawyers look into this. Does this make sense? And you can look at different ways to be a partner. So let's see what we have as we further on into the joint venture.
To continue our analogy here, we want to educate you so you can design a good prenup.
And this will all make sense when you look at our ending picture. Okay, so on that line of relationship, um, what are you getting yourself into? You want to know, you want to, try before you buy, know before you go. The joint venture route isn't for everybody. And also, when we go at that slide that had that 1 to 2 year that gave you that time frame, how long are you going to date somebody before you put a ring on it? Okay. If you say you're smart, I'm smart, we're going to bring this together, in 12 months, you should know if this is going to work out or not. You don't need to have this be a 3 year, that's a long engagement. Nobody has time or money for that. So what are we trying to get together for? How are we going to make decisions? I know we talked about decision trees, profit sharing. Are we going to do a shared developer fee? So in some cases, it's 60-40, 60 being the organization with the more experience, or the organization that can take on more of the financial burden. Um, is it within a neighborhood context? Um, you know, One thing I would say for those of you who are representing communities of color, that neighborhood context, you have to be strong on that. You do not want someone coming into your community that you have advocated for and engaged people around to be extractive. You don't want that. You want to make sure that if someone is coming into this community and they're looking at a joint venture, that it truly is a joint venture and it's not a David and Goliath thing, and they're not coming in and they have all the cards and you're just a 1% thing. You just show up as a token. That's not going to work out. You want to look at, your clauses. Do we have some conflict resolution? How are we going to deal with that? I know I've done joint ventures before, and one backlash that we always get into is the time, because I will take my time to do the community planning, the community engagement, and typical developers that are doing it for profit, their time is their money. And so we have to come up with some kind of a balance here as to like, well, how long is this going to go on? And when do we say it's a go? And then when can we start? Because I have my trustees and my finance partner biting at the bit. What are we doing here? So you need to think about that. And also you want to have an exit strategy. If this is not working, or if we say within 9 months, this doesn't seem to be working out, or we can't get the development team together, or this is just not the right time, then it's not the right time. But you want to keep looking at different ways to do that. And again, always keep that pro forma first and foremost. You want to look at that budget. And, again, I would say for me, if you're going to go the joint venture route, you might want to vet folks before you start doing a deep dive in the community engagement. Because when you start the community engagement, you want to show people that we've done our feasibility. We are aware that we're not strong enough to take on this project or meet this need by ourselves. And so we're bringing in ABC, blah, blah, blah. Because they've done, their last project was $26 million and it helped so many people. And so now we're going to muscle up and we're going to join with this project. You want to engage them, but you want to make sure you're vetting these folks before that process. Next slide, please. So, on this portion here, no, I don't want to go mute. This portion here, you want to look at these three components. What is the risk? Is the risk higher than the value? Is the value higher than the reward? Where do we get? You want to constantly playing this balance game. The best formula here, and I'm glad Maggie put it here, risk plus financial contribution equal rewards plus control. Now, obviously we can do the math here. 1 + 1 always equals 2. If all projects you're gonna have is gonna have a risk because you're doing affordable housing. It's risk. It's a risky business. So you have to figure out what is a risk for you. That's a conversation you definitely want to have with your developer because a lot of times they don't want to do speculative things. They want to base their design based upon the market. What does the market say? What do the appraisals say? And if this is what you're saying, you have to make me a believer as to why I'm going to take on more risk in this project and not reap the rewards. What is the value? And then there's one thing here you have to, if I'm talking from the nonprofit lens, you need to be able to make that story about the return on investment. Because in many cases, when you're going into marginalized communities or communities that have socially economic deficient, it is hard to say that you're going to have a return on investment within the next 3 years. It may not happen that way. If you're the sole development that is coming into that community and it has in for the last 20 years, your return on investment is going to be very low in the beginning. You're going to have to do supplemental development, small scale things around that development to support that market. You're going to have a developer or financial partner, the person making this financial contribution has to have them as a believer in the process because it's not going to show up a high return on investment right away. Even the tax credit deals, either 4% or 9%, again, folks don't capture that right away. When we're talking about rewards and control, again, you want to think about what does the community get to benefit? What are the rewards for them? Maybe they're creating some permanent jobs under property management, maintenance, groundskeeping. Some people have a super living there. What are the rewards are they getting? They're getting attention into the neighborhood. You need to be able to factor that in. But the person that is putting in the risk and the financial contribution, they get the points. They get the rewards and they usually get more control over the project. If you're saying, well, I can't make much of a financial contribution, think of your social capital. Think of that value. I have social capital. Without my social capital, this project doesn't get through the public approvals. You have stake in the game. Even if you have $0 towards the actual project itself, social capital is value. You don't want to commodify that neighborhood, but you want to make sure you have social capital. And then site control. You have more than anything. You do have the site control because you have the community. And sometimes you don't get site control without partnering with a nonprofit or an agency that's within that area that's already providing services. So you do have more control or value than you think. Next slide, please.
And also don't forget to put a financial dollar amount on all of this feasibility work you're doing as well as an organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Community engagement costs time and money. So, selecting a partner, do we have goals and mission aligned? Remember, I said some of you may not all have already been an affordable housing agency, but your goal, maybe you run an organization for the developmentally disabled, and you're noticing that you can only help your clients but so far because that housing insecurity is coming up, the food insecurity, whatever the case may be. That's why you want to select a partner that's going to help you really 10x your missions and really help your client, again, the end user. Um, it's the capability alignment. So we're talking about the market rate, the retail. It might be a mixed use structure where it's commercial. It may work out. Um, Either you have a good standing track record or your partner does. So you're loaning that strength from them. They have a good connection with the community. Again, that's something that you want to get on the bandwagon with. Experience with partners. You want that person, whoever you're partnering with the joint venture, they get to call the bank. They say, hello, M&T, this is Jake. Jake I'm doing a project with ABC nonprofit. We really, it looks like we get some holdups here with the community investment officer. How can you help out? You want that person that can make that call. Remember, if you're partnering with a for-profit, you really want them to do the things that you can't do, which is sometimes the political stuff. You can't do that. You do not want to lose your 501c3 status. So you want them to be able to say, hey, take the hand, make that call, get on that golf course, do what you need to do. We need to get this project going. The reputation, and then the organizational culture. So again, I want to make sure that if we're looking at ways that we're coming together, think of it as a blend, and you're coming from a place of strength and not weakness. So we're coming fully present, knowing that we can do this really well, and this other partner is really doing it, can do this really well. So you can do your own when you're selecting a partner. The other thing we need to put here is that you've done your SWOT analysis. You said, okay, I've seen your strengths and weaknesses. I've seen your strengths and weaknesses. Okay, how can we turn this into opportunities, and um, how can we deal with the opportunities and threats together? Are we stronger together, or are you pulling me down? Again, having these questions while you're in the dating period. Ask these questions now before you go too far. Next slide, please. And here we go. Here we go. We have dated. It's been a great romance. We've decided, you know what? We're going to go for it. This is a goal project. We have our strengths. Our families have met. We're now married by contract, contractual obligation to this person. And this is how we're going to move forward. So now we're going to get to the point now where we start the construction project. So elements of success, communication. You need to be talking with, again, you need to be talking with your partner. You don't need to say, well, I'm going to withhold this information and then surprise you, 6 months later. No, 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 no. We need to know that SWOT analysis on both sides, because it doesn't matter if the other venture, the joint venture, has a partner that is more financially sound than you are. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. So you need to talk. You need to know that, and you need to know what you have. If you have a board of directors, and obviously they might have a board of trustees, have we had this conversation? How long is this gonna? How long is this gonna go? Are there other opportunities? And we're doing joint ventures with two. Don't get a surprise when you say, "Oh, well, I like to bring on another partner." What? Why are we bringing in this third person? These are conversations you need to have. You need to have a trusting relationship. Also, when it comes to community engagement, the community needs to be able to trust you, if you're the nonprofit, that when you're getting into this joint venture, they're not going to get screwed out of this deal. because you gotta worry about your end user. You want to define the roles and responsibilities back to the initial development process. There's an applicant, there's an owner, there's a developer, architect, and then you have your various consultants, then you have your general contractor, property management or management agent if it's multifamily, or real estate agent if it's single family home ownership. Where are you going? What role are they going to play? These are all the things that need to be discussed. You want to be clear. And financially, you want to be very clear with that. Because if I'm going to be the owner, I'm going to be this one, or I'm just the applicant, you're the lead. Okay, well, how much does that cost? Where does that put me? You just want to make sure that all those questions, and if you're uncomfortable talking about finances, talking about these things, then you need to talk about that before you get into a joint venture, because these things need to be brought out. And you want to be able to define those goals. And I think there's one thing I would say that's not here, but one other element is that you want to be nimble, because something can happen. Like many of us, when the pandemic happened, that knocked everybody off limit. We had no idea that this was going to happen. How do we adapt? How do we change focus? How do we get back on track? How do we, what's our messaging? You want to be on the same page. But you want to leave room for flexibility. That's why you want to have the exit strategy or your prenup. Things ain't looking right.
Not
Yeah, the partner was real sharp, taking you out at a nice restaurant, all those development meetings, and then all of a sudden, tis, they're not answering the phone anymore.
and
So next
Stephanie.
slide. Yep.
Oh, I just was going to say, if we're going to stick with this analogy, Stephanie mentioned 2 other entities that you want to show a united front to. So if you're the married couple, you want to show a united front when you're dealing with the community
That's
and
right.
the funders, right?
That's right.
So
That's right.
the
That's right.
children,
And then
the problem
yeah.
children.
So exactly, because you don't want, when you're at the community meeting and the person says, well, that's their problem. What? You throwing me under the bus? It's definitely going to make a very difficult dinner conversation tonight. You want to be able to say, okay, well, we didn't think about that. We'll get back to you. There's a lot of, we start speaking French. We will get back to you. And having that united front actually gives you more support, and say that we stand together or we fall together. But if you both believe in this project, then that gives you the support that you need. So in our last 5 minutes, what's coming up next? Financing, money, money, money. Um, we're going to do an overview of financing resources. I know a lot of you are, I know you want to skip straight to the, like, how do we get the money? How do we get this project going? But the other stuff is easily overlooked, and it will create a problem for you when it comes to trying to get your financing. We want to talk about understanding the capital stack. I love that term that Maggie has, the capital stack. If you're doing it in affordable housing, because it is a risky business, you're probably going to have like 15 people that you're going to have to be wedded to. They're all there too. You need a king size bed. They're all in there because you got to make sure you're making room for them, because they're going to want their stuff. It's like the 15 kids, and you're like, oh God, what did we get ourselves into? Oh yeah, they're there, they're needy, and you're going to have to address those needs. In many cases, for 15 to 25 years. Then we're going to go over a brief overview of what a CHODO model is. CHODO, again, is Community Housing Development Organization. That's usually towards anything between 1 to 4 units. People usually do the CHODO financing style for home ownership, single family, doubles, or 4-unit structures where it's like a townhome style that they rent out. HUD usually doesn't like you to do the last option where you do the rental style. They really do want the CHODO model to home ownership. But we'll walk you through. I really like CHODO. And the reason why I like it because it's not competitive. So, and the money's readily available, but there is some risk with that as well. So Maggie, did I miss anything?
No, I just would add to this, we'll have this session on financing, and then the last session will go a little deeper on some of the sources we give an overview of, as well as, what would it look like to have a conversation with a lender about your project. And then I also just want to reiterate what I shared about, RFPs and resources for hiring professionals. We also have some additional resources we can share with you if you're interested in doing a JV as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And with that said, I think I made it a little easier, hopefully, for everyone this assignment. So we have an actual worksheet, which we'll be emailing out to go through a deep dive some of the questions that we discussed today. If you don't know the answer yet, I think just put how you're going to find the answer out. So if you say, I don't,
Research.
yep,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
we haven't done a title search yet, but we're going to do a title search soon or whatever. Just
Or
give
we're
us.
going to hire a title company.
Mm-hmm.
What steps are you taking to get there?
So when you go through this, it's okay if you haven't done it or you don't know the answer, but based on what we've covered so far in this course, I think you can all probably say how you'll find the answer.
Mm-hmm. And no,
Um,
you cannot call us and ask us for the answer.
well, we might give you hints though.
Yeah. But no full answers. But I can be bribed with Starbucks and pistachio ice cream. Just putting that out there.
Oh. So, yep. Does anyone have any questions other than Easter's question, which I
Easter's
didn't
question,
forget
yeah.
about?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, do you want to get into Easter's question, or do we want to excuse folks and then keep Easter on the line?
If people want to stay, I do think that Easter's question was a good one. The ladder that she's referencing was a little confusing in the context of our presentation, so I think it's a good idea to revisit it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to pull it up here. Are you still seeing my screen?
Yep.
Okay, good. So I'll pull up the old PowerPoint real fast.
I guess Lucifer is not interested in this session right now.
Well, she's been fed, so she's happy
I'm
now.
with her. Go for it, Lucy. And as Maggie said, for those of you who have a hard stop at 7:30, this message is, this is still being recorded, but we definitely want to address any confusion. We want to make sure everybody's clear about what's going on. So if you do have to log off, we will see you next week. But if you want to stay on down.
Okay, I'm gonna reshare. Maybe.
I'm so glad you're in charge of this because I am not tech savvy. I only know how to change the background of my.
If we, let's see, here we go. Okay. If we, can you see the PowerPoint now?
Yep. And then you just need to get to that slide with the ladder, right?
Yeah, so I think of this ladder, and Stephanie, I'm gonna let you actually explain it, but
Yep.
I think of this ladder as more along the lines of if you've ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Yep.
where it's like, yeah, the bottom is utterly unacceptable, right? If
Mm-hmm.
people aren't, if people are hungry, they're not going to be able to, be educated, right? So this ladder is kind of similar to that. It's not necessarily like you never really want to be at the bottom,
Mm-mm.
if that makes
Mm-mm.
sense.
Mm-mm.
But
Mm-mm.
Easter, feel free to chime in.
Yes,
I don't know.
it's very confusing when you go from citizen control down to manipulation with therapy in there. And my thought is that these words are these rungs play on each other. You keep building, if particularly if you're saying it like Maslow hierarchy. So
That's true.
how
So
does this fit into affordable housing?
So I'm gonna let Stephanie tell you about where she likes to operate.
Right.
And then we're gonna see about calling Sherry.
So this is Sherry Arnstein's letter of citizen participation. So what I think the best way to understand this, Easter, is what communities often experience. So when you're doing, because remember this was under our, sorry, I live with a train, a live railroad behind my house. When we talked about community outreach, one of the things we talked about is like when you should do it, and some of the pros and cons. What usually happens is that folks start at the bottom, where they're saying, you don't you want this? You don't want to pass this money up. What community would want to not have a $10 million investment of whatever they're trying to do? So you want to not necessarily climb this ladder. If it was me, I would just want to go straight to citizen delegated power and citizen control in partnership. But often the way this is based on how the community feels, there are in the space of participation, that they feel that because they weren't in the process, that people are feeling manipulated. They're feeling that it's like a therapy session. So this is how they feel when you go through these different ladders, these different rungs. So if they feel manipulated, if it's like, or they can feel, I don't know what just happened. I see myself twice.
I can't even blame that on Lucy.
Is that making sense, or is that even adding more confusion, Easter?
No, I now that you say that, it makes a little more sense. I just did not, the therapy was throwing me off. Like, how does that fit in there? As
Right.
well as some of those other words, because I would think one would be building as opposed to, I could understand the side over here with non-participation, degree of tokenism, and the degree of citizen power. But those words that are on the rungs just threw me for a loop.
Yeah, no, because think about it. So let's talk about the wrong number 2, where it's under therapy. People will feel like, you ever gone to a meeting, you feel like, well, what just happened? Or the person is just like, well, wait a second. What was this? Did I
Yeah,
even?
almost like a
Yeah.
gaslighting moment where you're
Yeah,
like, what?
yes. And you're just like, wait, what? Or, you have a real slick presentation and everything's going on and you're like, oh, well, this sounds like this would be good. And that's how they just, they get you for the okie doke. The therapy session is the person's never answering your questions.
Got
Right?
it.
So you go to this community meeting and you say, well, I'm concerned about the noise. You're proposing 50 units. This is the mostly senior population, and you're targeting young families. I'm concerned about the noise, the school buses, all the traffic, and blah blah blah. And the person never answers your question. They say, "Well, why don't you? Can you expand on that?
Or
Tell
I
me
know
how
what's
that made you
best for
feel."
you. Yeah.
But that's not solving your problem. The other one is the informing one. That's the one when they tell you what they're doing, but they don't care what you're saying. So you're sitting there, they're saying, we're proposing a 50-unit structure. We think this is a great idea. This is what we plan to do it. We go before zoning board the next 2 weeks. We're just keeping you posted. that is not a community participation, citizen participation, because you didn't have any chance to say, well, I'm concerned about that. Why is it 50 units? Or why does the building look that way? They don't have any question and answers. They're not allowing you to talk. The consultation is like, well, we're going to tell you about the project. We're going to have you meet with the consultants. We're going to keep you, again, this is an upgrade from the informing one. But it's just like, well, we're telling you about it, but we're also not giving you any power. So you're just here because I need to check this box. And then the placation is exactly what it is. It's like, okay, we're coming to your neighborhood. This will do. You need this. And they start telling you things like, well, this is a marginalized community. Don't talk to me that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, and I could get the partnership, delegated power, and
right,
citizen
right,
control. It's
right.
just those lower words were just not
Oh, yeah,
cutting it.
yeah. But like I said, the therapy is the one of like when you just none of the questions get answered. You're like, what just happened? They might have like, well, let's do a meditation. You're like, oh, well, this feels nice. Let's do a round table discussion. Oh, okay. Well, wait a second. What just
I think also, Easter, this is where I get to brag about Stephanie, because not only is she a developer, but she has master's degree in planning, so she knows all about this stuff. But this is like sociologically, I guess this is from the 60s. So I think some of the word, like, we think of therapy as a good thing today.
Absolutely.
right.
I go, I know a lot of people go, but I think that in the 60s, this was more of like, let us cure you. Like, we
Right.
know best. We're going to fix you. We're going to cure you. So I think it's a little bit of that too. It's just like, it's highly accurate. So it's stayed relevant in the citizen engagement world, but it is from the 60s.
And you definitely don't want people doing the savior. You know how some people say that, oh, they got a savior complex. Like, hello, poor people of Rochester or Buffalo. We are here with our cape to save you from the bowels of the city. Like, wait a second, I live across the street. Don't even.
Gotcha.
So that's how they make. So this ladder is how you're made to feel. So yeah, I think we didn't have a lot of time to go through it because we had so many things to go through under the community engagement piece. But I'm glad that you raised that, because it's some powerful wording that was chosen there. Also the manipulation or the placation is like, whoa. But no one would spell that out. No one would say that straight up, like, oh, we're here just to consult with the community. We're here to just tell you what we're doing, and then we're not going to ask for your input. Thank you for your time.
I know that's so very true.
Yeah.
So
And
thank you very
meetings
much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, those are usually the meetings with the best sandwiches. Of a catered engagement process. So again, always come up with those questions, guys. We appreciate them. Anything that we need to do, behind the scenes or a little bit after, we don't mind that. That's why we added that bonus thing of the one-on-one. We know we have so much we're going over. There's so very little that we can get into the details. Like I said, you all haven't been able to sort of meet each other and kind of figure out what kind of projects you're working on. Just because time frames, we understand that, especially with it being summer, everybody wants to enjoy the great weather, except for today, I think it's raining. But yes,
Sun was out at
ask questions.
spots.
Oh, yes. Well, thank you all. We will see you next week. Fill out that sheet that you came, Maggie. Is it the feasibility sheet around the SPL codes? Okay.
Yep, we'll
Thank
be
you.
emailing you a 2-page worksheet this time.
Yep. Thank you all. Have a great evening.